My dad lost his job, so I helped pay off $18,000 of my family's debt. But a week later, Mom said, "You've served your purpose." I walked out of that house without saying a word. I didn't take anything with me except my car keys. 2 weeks later, they were evicted and showed up at my door. The coffee was still warm in my hands when my mother delivered the words that would change everything between us forever. "You've served your purpose," she said without looking up from her Sunday paper. "Now we're fine without you." I stood there in our kitchen, holding a cup I didn't even remember pouring, my brain struggling to process what I just heard. 1 week. It had been exactly 1 week since I'd emptied my life savings, $18,000, to pull my family back from the brink of financial ruin. My brother's laughter cut through the silence from the living room. "Guess you bought your way out," he called, not even bothering to sit up from where he sprawled across the couch. That's when I knew they meant every word. The numbness that followed felt like drowning in reverse. Instead of water filling my lungs, something vital was being drained out of me. I set the coffee cup on the counter and walked out of that house without saying a word. I didn't take anything with me except my car keys and a clarity so sharp it hurt. 2 weeks later, they were at my door. It started in February when my father lost his job. No severance, no warning, just a pink slip and a lie that lasted 3 months. Every morning, he'd put on his uniform and leave the house, driving aimlessly around town until it was time to come home. The charade might have continued indefinitely if I hadn't spotted him outside a gas station on a Thursday afternoon, still in his work clothes, frantically scratching lottery tickets like a man possessed. That image, my father, desperate and delusional, betting our family's future on scratch-off dreams, marked the beginning of the end. The debt was staggering. $18,000 spread across a maze of credit cards, payday loans, overdue utilities, and a second mortgage my mother had secretly signed. The interest rates were predatory, the late fees astronomical. They'd been drowning for months, too proud to ask for help, too ashamed to admit how bad things had gotten. I was 24, working in IT for a mid-sized logistics company. Good salary, excellent benefits, and a meticulous savings plan that had taken years to build. I still lived at home, banking most of my paycheck while planning to move out within the year. Maybe even put money down on a condo. I worked weekends, freelance during my spare time, and lived modestly. Every dollar had a purpose. When my mother finally confessed everything, sobbing at our kitchen table surrounded by a fortress of unopened bills, I did what I'd always done. I fixed it. I spent 7 days negotiating with loan sharks and credit card companies, transferring money from every account I had. I lived on coffee and adrenaline, sleeping maybe 3 hours a night, my laptop screen burning my eyes as I orchestrated payment after payment. When I clicked submit on the final transaction, I felt something in my chest loosen. Not pride, just the hollow relief of a crisis averted. Then came that Sunday morning and my mother's casual dismissal, delivered like she was commenting on the weather. What my family didn't know, what they still don't know, is that while I was saving them, I was also protecting myself. One of the payday lenders had mentioned something during our negotiations, almost in passing. His contact worked with a group that specialized in buying up defaulted properties, no questions asked. Distressed assets, he called them. Curious, I did some digging. That's when I discovered my mother's biggest lie. The house wasn't just at risk, it was collateral. She'd leveraged our family home for one of those high-interest loans, and she'd hidden it from everyone, including me. Even as I was writing check after check to save them, she couldn't find the courage to tell me the whole truth. So I made a call. I told the contact that if he could buy out that particular debt, I'd sell it to him for exactly what I'd paid, and he could handle the account however he saw fit. The agreement was simple. As long as my parents stayed current on their payments, nothing would change. But if they defaulted again, he agreed within 24 hours. I didn't think they'd actually lose the house. I just wanted to ensure that if they reverted to their old patterns, the lying, the financial recklessness, the assumption that I'd always be there to clean up their messes, there would be consequences they couldn't escape. After my mother's dismissal that Sunday morning, I found myself hoping they would default. Exactly 14 days after I walked out of their kitchen, they appeared at my new apartment like refugees from their own poor choices. I'd found the place that same week, as if some part of me had known I'd need an exit strategy. My father looked like he hadn't slept in a month. My mother clutched a stack of legal documents with shaking hands, her makeup streaked and desperate. My sister carried everything she owned in a garbage bag. My brother held a laundry basket of wrinkled clothes, his earlier smugness replaced by hollow shock. "We didn't mean it," my mother said when I opened the door. Her voice cracked on every word. "Please, Alex. We lost everything. They took the house. We have nowhere else to go." I studied their faces through the gap in my door chain. These people who had used me, dismissed me, and discarded me the moment I was no longer useful. These people who had turned my generosity into a transaction and my love into leverage. I closed the door. They knocked for 15 more minutes, their pleas growing increasingly desperate. I made myself dinner and ate in silence while they begged through the wood. Eventually, they left. I didn't answer any of their calls that night or the next day. They'd made their choice when they decided I was nothing more than a financial instrument. Now I was returning the favor, just more efficiently. 3 days later, they were back, pounding on my door at 3 in the morning. My phone lit up with a barrage of messages, desperate apologies, hollow promises, manipulative guilt trips disguised as family obligations. I finally opened the door, not because I'd forgiven them, but because my neighbors were starting to complain. They looked even worse than before, broken, defeated, carrying their remaining possessions like survivors of some natural disaster. They dropped their belongings in my living room and immediately began making themselves comfortable, as if my home was just another resource for them to exploit. My mother headed straight for the guest bedroom. My father collapsed onto my couch. It was like watching squatters claim territory, assuming I was still just a help. "We just need a little time," my mother said finally. "Just until we figure things out." "No," I said. The word hung in the air like a physical thing. "You can stay one night. One. After that, you need to find somewhere else. I'm not your backup plan." My father muttered something about how I was acting like a stranger. My brother added, "You wouldn't even have that money if it weren't for us raising you." I laughed. It was either that or start screaming. I slept with my bedroom door locked that night. The next morning, I told them they had until noon to leave. By 11:47 they were gone. Within a week, the narrative had begun to shift. My aunt called to tell me they were staying in her basement, fighting every night, blaming each other and, increasingly, me. Somehow, I transformed from the son who'd paid off $18,000 of their debt to the villain who'd orchestrated their downfall. At family gatherings, my mother would make theatrical displays of grief, hugging relatives while crying about how I'd turned my back on them. My brother told anyone who'd listen that I'd set them up. The story evolved with each telling, becoming more dramatic, more sympathetic to their plight. Cousins started texting me late at night, asking if it was true that I'd given them money knowing it wouldn't be enough. Others approached me at family events with carefully neutral expressions, saying things like, "I'm not judging you, but it's pretty harsh." The truth became irrelevant. They'd crafted a version of events where I was the calculating villain who trapped them for sport, conveniently omitting the part about using the house as collateral without telling me, or the fact that I'd offered to handle every aspect of that debt if they could just avoid defaulting again. They preferred their version where I was the puppet master pulling strings from the shadows, rather than the exhausted son who'd simply stopped cushioning their falls. A month after they'd moved into my aunt's basement, I found a note taped to my apartment door. Written in my mother's familiar handwriting on lined notebook paper, it read, "We know what you did. You can pretend you're the victim, but we know. Family doesn't stay broken forever. We'll be back sooner than you think." The phrasing felt like something from a bad movie, but what disturbed me was the implication that someone had talked. The only way they could know anything about my arrangement with the lender was if someone had given them information. That meant they were actively investigating me, asking questions, building a case. 2 days later, I spotted them. A dented beige minivan parked across from my building at 1 in the afternoon on a Saturday. My mother in the passenger seat, staring up at my windows like she was conducting surveillance. My brother eating chips in the driver's seat, legs propped on the dashboard. I watched them from behind a hedge for 15 minutes until they finally drove away. That night, I installed a security camera in my entryway. The harassment escalated quickly. My cousin Emily called to tell me they'd been visiting her diner, asking questions about me, spreading stories about how I'd stolen money from them. My mailbox was broken into, all my correspondence rifled through but nothing taken, just examined. The building's security camera caught a tall, lean figure in a gray hoodie. Same build as my brother. I filed a police report, changed my locks, and put a freeze on my credit. Then I made a decision that would change everything. I was done reacting. I moved out on a Sunday morning without telling anyone. New neighborhood, new building, new life. I changed my phone number, created a new email address, and deleted every social media account. For the first time in my adult life, I was completely unavailable to them. The peace lasted 3 months. It started with a photo slipped under my new door, a picture of me leaving my building, taken from across the street. No note, just the image. Then came calls from unknown numbers, voicemails filled with nothing but breathing. I ran into my aunt at a grocery store one evening. She looked exhausted, aged beyond her years. "They said you disappeared," she said quietly. I didn't respond. "Your mom is getting worse. Blames you for everything. Says you turned the whole family against her, that you're a traitor." She looked down at her feet. "I think they're trying to find you, Alex. I think they want to make you pay." That night, I made another decision. Distance wasn't enough. I needed to disappear completely. I changed my work email, started freelancing under a different name, moved most of my money into accounts they'd never heard of. Bit by bit, I erased every connection they could exploit. This wasn't a Cold War anymore, it was survival. 3 months after I vanished, I got invited to another family gathering. I saw the guest list: my parents, my siblings, half the extended family. All the people who'd chosen to believe their version of events over the truth. I didn't respond to the invitation. Emily called the next morning. "They were looking for you. All of them. Your mom said if you didn't show up, it just proves how ungrateful you really are." That's when I made the final cut. I blocked every number, deleted every contact, unfollowed the last few family members still connected to my online presence. Then I did something I should have done years ago. I opened my budgeting app and looked at my finances. For the first time since I'd started working, every dollar in my accounts was mine. No emergency bailouts, no crisis management, no covering for people who couldn't manage their own lives. I had savings again, real savings, more than I'd ever imagined possible. I moved again. A nicer place in a quiet neighborhood, rent paid 6 months in advance. New furniture, weekend trips, dental work I'd postponed for years because someone always needed that money more urgently. I was living well for the first time in my adult life. My aunt called one final time, months later. Her voice was flat, emotionless. "They're gone, Alex." I waited for her to explain. "Packed up everything and left in the middle of the night. Didn't even say goodbye. Left the basement a mess, took whatever they could carry." She paused. "They left a note saying they couldn't keep waiting for you to come to your senses. Said the family was poisoned and they were starting over." She didn't ask where I was or what I'd done or if I felt sorry. She just sounded tired. "There's more. Your brother got into some trouble. Shoplifting. They let him off with a warning, but it's in the system now." The call ended there. A week later, Emily reached out with rumors. They were staying with some distant cousin in a rural part of the state. Maybe. My mother had tried calling old neighbors asking for money, claiming she was displaced. Displaced. Even then, they couldn't call it what it was. I didn't ask for more updates. I didn't need them. Sometimes I wonder what story they're telling now. Are they still painting me as the villain who destroyed their lives? Are they sitting around someone else's table, spinning new lies for new audiences? Or have they finally realized that the door they burned was the last one that would ever open for them? I'll never know, because I stopped listening. The last thing Emily told me was that my mother had asked her, quietly, if I ever mentioned them. I hadn't. And I wouldn't. They taught me the most valuable lesson of my life. Sometimes the people who hurt you most are the ones who raised you to accept it. They'd shown me that love without boundaries is just another form of exploitation. And they demonstrated, with perfect clarity, that some bridges are worth burning. Now I wake up in a home where no one asks me to carry weight I never agreed to lift. I eat dinner without checking my phone every 5 minutes. I go to sleep without wondering who will need rescuing tomorrow. They told me I'd end up alone, and in a way, they were right. But they'd mistaken isolation for peace, abandonment for freedom. What they'd actually given me was the gift of understanding the difference between being needed and being valued, between being family and being useful. I'd paid $18,000 to learn that lesson. It was worth every penny.